The drive into the unknown. The streets were unusually silent as Jasmine drove home from her studio late that night, her car's tires humming softly on the empty road. The city was asleep, wrapped in a quiet stillness that usually brought her peace. Jasmine had spent the night lost in her work, pouring her emotions into a canvas in preparation for an upcoming gallery show. Creating art was her sanctuary, her escape. Each brushstroke brought her closer to capturing the image of hope she envisioned, an image she hoped would touch someone, anyone, who needed to feel seen. But tonight, as she drove home, a faint unease lingered. Her thoughts drifted to her exhibit, and the story she hoped to tell through her work. For Jasmine, art wasn't just a hobby, it was a voice, a way to share her perspective, and perhaps help others see the world through a different lens. Tonight, though, as she looked out at the vast stretch of road ahead, she felt small and exposed, like an isolated speck on a blank canvas. Without warning, piercing red and blue lights flooded her rearview mirror, cutting through the darkness and jolting her from her thoughts. Her heart leaped into her throat as her mind struggled to make sense of the sudden intrusion. A police car, closing in behind her. Instinctively, she tensed, her muscles tightening as her mind scrambled with questions. Why was she being pulled over? Had she done something wrong? She'd always been cautious, a rule follower, never once finding herself on the wrong side of the law. She glanced at her speedometer. No, she hadn't been speeding. There had been no signs indicating a violation. Her mind raced, a mix of confusion and dread swirling within her. Gripping the steering wheel, Jasmine let out a shaky breath, feeling her heart pound against her ribs. She carefully guided her car to the side of the road, the darkness around her amplifying her unease. She was alone, far from the reassuring hum of city lights and people. Only the quiet hum of her engine and the piercing lights behind her offered any sign of life. As her car came to a stop, she turned off her engine and rolled down her window, her fingers trembling slightly as they rested on the steering wheel. The cool night air brushed against her face, yet she could feel her palms growing clammy, a mixture of anxiety and apprehension settling in her stomach. She stole a glance in the side mirror, catching a shadowy figure approaching her car. The officer's footsteps echoed in the stillness, each step sounding louder and louder, like the beating of her own heart. Thoughts spiraled through her mind, a chaotic mix of fear and caution. Jasmine knew too well the stories that circulated in her community, the tense encounters that sometimes unfolded when assumptions were made based on appearance rather than actions. Her experiences had taught her caution, an instinctual guard she couldn't ignore. She was a black woman, alone on a deserted road, with a police officer approaching her in the dead of night. She'd never felt more vulnerable. Despite her clean record and a life spent steering clear of trouble, Jasmine couldn't shake the gnawing sense of dread that settled over her. The isolation of the road amplified every sensation, every sound, and she felt an unsettling wave of uncertainty wrap around her like a heavy blanket. Memories of headlines and stories shared among friends and family surfaced in her mind. She had always listened, empathized, but never thought she'd be in a similar situation, confronted by a fear that felt almost ancestral. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself, taking a deep, steadying breath. She'd rehearsed this in her mind before, the actions, the words, everything she would do if she ever found herself in a similar position. Keep your hands visible, be polite, follow instructions. She took another breath, willing her heartbeat to slow, and waited, listening as the officer's footsteps drew closer. The shadow finally reached her window, and for a moment, there was silence, a tense pause as Jasmine stared straight ahead, refusing to look directly at the figure looming beside her. She felt her grip tighten on the steering wheel, her knuckles white from the pressure. She hadn't yet seen his face, but she felt his presence like a weight pressing down on her. "Good evening, ma'am," came a voice, unexpectedly soft, breaking the silence. It was calm, measured, and held none of the sternness Jasmine had expected. She looked up, surprised, to see a tall figure leaning slightly, his face illuminated by the streetlight behind him. The officer's gaze was kind, his eyes meeting hers with an unexpected warmth that seemed to cut through her fear. Jasmine blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by his demeanor. "I'm sorry if I startled you," he said, his tone apologetic, as though he could sense her unease. "I notice that your rear tire looks like it's running low on air. It's nearly flat." He pointed to her back tire, his expression genuine, not a hint of reproach or suspicion. Jasmine felt her throat tighten as she processed his words. Low on air. She hadn't noticed anything off while driving. Her mind, so wrapped up in her work and the familiar route home, had overlooked what was clearly an issue. For a moment, she was at a loss for words, stunned by the turn of events. The officer, noticing her hesitation, continued, "I can help you change it if you'd like. It might not be safe to drive on it all the way home." He gave her a reassuring smile, his posture relaxed, as though he had all the time in the world. Jasmine was silent, staring at him as her mind raced to catch up. This was not the scenario she had anticipated, and her fear began to give way to something else, relief mixed with embarrassment. She felt a flush rise to her cheeks as she realized she had braced herself for a completely different outcome. Here was a man, an officer of the law, extending her a kindness she hadn't expected, treating her not as a suspect, but as a person in need of help. "Yes," she finally managed, her voice a little shaky. "Thank you. That would be really helpful." She found herself smiling slightly, the first hint of warmth breaking through her initial trepidation. As the officer moved to the back of the car to examine the tire, Jasmine took a deep breath, feeling the tension begin to dissolve. She watched him in her side mirror, noticing the care with which he handled her vehicle, as if it were his own. She was touched by his attentiveness, the way he seemed genuinely invested in her safety. A soft breeze rustled the leaves on the trees lining the road, carrying with it a sense of calm. For the first time since she'd seen the flashing lights, Jasmine felt a small spark of gratitude, a realization that perhaps not every encounter was a confrontation, not every interaction defined by suspicion. As she sat there in her car, waiting for the officer's guidance, she thought about how quick she'd been to expect the worst, how her own fears and biases had colored her perception. This encounter had caught her off guard, and in that unexpected moment of kindness, she began to question her own assumptions. In the silence of that empty road, Jasmine felt a shift within herself, a reminder that people are sometimes more than their roles, more than the fears they might represent. And as the officer approached her window again, she felt the weight on her shoulders lift, if only a little, allowing her to see a different possibility, a reminder that there is humanity even in the most unlikely of places. The face behind the badge. Jasmine remained seated, hands resting gently on the steering wheel, as the officer checked her rear tire with careful, deliberate movements. Her initial anxiety had begun to ease, but her mind was still reeling from the unexpected turn of events. She watched him in her side mirror, his flashlight illuminating the tire and casting a faint glow on the dark road. In the quiet of the night, the faint hum of passing cars in the distance was the only sound besides the rhythmic rustling of leaves, their gentle sway contrasting sharply with the tension that had once filled her chest. As he worked, Jasmine's thoughts drifted, replaying the moments leading up to this encounter. The intensity of her fear still lingered, echoing in her mind. She'd always heard stories of situations like this going wrong. Friends, family members, even strangers sharing their experiences of being stopped, questioned, scrutinized. And here she was, having expected the worst, only to find herself in a moment of calm, watching an officer who seemed more intent on helping than interrogating. He finished his inspection and walked back to her window, his shadow falling across her as he leaned down. In the dim light, she could make out his face more clearly, a man in his early 40s, his eyes warm but tired, as if he'd seen his share of long nights on the job. His features, rugged and softened by the years, hinted at a person who had been shaped by his own stories, by moments both tough and tender. "Your tire's definitely losing air, but it's not completely flat," he said, his tone casual yet friendly, like a neighbor giving advice rather than a policeman delivering news. It should hold up long enough for you to get home, but I'd recommend getting it checked first thing tomorrow. You wouldn't want to end up stranded in the middle of nowhere. Jasmine nodded, her mind still trying to absorb the surreal nature of the situation. Thank you, she murmured, her voice soft but sincere. She wasn't sure if she was thanking him for the tire check or for the kindness he had shown her. Perhaps it was both. The officer nodded, smiling slightly, but didn't step away just yet. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. She could feel a faint blush creeping into her cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity. He seemed to sense her lingering unease, his expression shifting to one of understanding, as though he knew exactly what had been running through her mind just moments before. You were pretty nervous back there, he observed gently, his voice low, almost as if he were confiding in her. I get it, though. Late at night, out here by yourself, it can be a little intimidating. Jasmine hesitated, surprised by his openness. She hadn't expected him to address the tension she had felt, let alone acknowledge it. She felt a sudden urge to explain herself, to tell him about the countless warnings and stories she'd heard, about the caution ingrained in her ever since she was a child. But she wasn't sure how to put it into words, how to articulate the quiet burden that came with these late-night encounters, the weight of mistrust that lingered unspoken but ever-present. The officer, perhaps sensing her hesitation, decided to fill the silence himself. I know this may sound strange, but I've had my own share of, well, let's call them assumptions. He smiled, a bit ruefully, and Jasmine found herself intrigued. She couldn't imagine what kind of assumptions a police officer might face, yet here he was, offering her a glimpse into his own experiences, making her feel less like a stranger under scrutiny and more like someone he wanted to understand. He shifted slightly, resting his hand on her window frame as he continued. A few years back, I was called to check out a suspicious person near a local park. It was late at night, so I went in with my guard up. I found a man there, sitting on a bench, just thinking, I guess. Turned out he was a veteran who had just moved to the area, trying to clear his head. But in that moment, I realized I'd let my own assumptions lead the way. I could see he was just as wary of me as I was of him. We ended up talking for nearly an hour about life, his family, his hopes for the future. He thanked me afterward, but it was me who should have thanked him. His voice trailed off, a distant look in his eyes as he seemed to relive the memory. Jasmine listened intently, caught off guard by the vulnerability in his words. It was rare, she realized, to hear someone in uniform speak so openly about their own moments of doubt, about the times when they had made mistakes and learned from them. She couldn't help but feel a sense of respect for this man who had chosen to share a part of himself with her, to remind her that beneath the badge, there was a person with their own struggles and growth. I know it's not easy, he continued, his gaze meeting hers with a quiet sincerity that disarmed her. Trust is hard to come by, especially these days. But I try to remind myself, every time I put on this uniform, that people are just people, no matter the uniform, no matter the badge. We all carry something with us, whether it's fear, pride, or hope. Jasmine felt a lump rise in her throat, a mixture of gratitude and a strange, unspoken kinship. For so long, she had carried her own fears and reservations, assuming that the world saw her through a single lens. Yet here was a man who, in the silence of this deserted road, was inviting her to see beyond the surface, to remember that kindness and compassion could be found in the most unexpected places. Finally, after a moment's pause, Jasmine found her voice. I appreciate that, she said quietly, the words barely louder than a whisper. I guess it's easy to assume the worst sometimes. Especially when you've heard so many stories. He nodded, his expression somber. I know. And I know the stories aren't just stories. They're real. But I try to remember that every day is a chance to make a different kind of story. One that maybe changes the way someone sees things, even if it's just a little. His words lingered in the air between them, and Jasmine felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. She realized, in that moment, that her encounter with this officer was more than just a stop on a quiet road. It was a reminder of the quiet courage it took to trust, to see people not as symbols, but as individuals with their own complexities. The officer straightened, his demeanor shifting back to one of polite professionalism. "If you're all set, I'll let you get back on the road. Just take it easy, okay? And get that tire checked soon." Jasmine nodded, a genuine smile breaking through her lingering nervousness. "Thank you, really, for everything." He tipped his hat slightly, a gesture that somehow felt both old-fashioned and respectful, before stepping away from her car. She watched as he walked back to his patrol vehicle, a figure moving back into the darkness, leaving behind an unexpected light in her heart. As she pulled back onto the road, Jasmine felt a strange lightness in her chest, as though a weight she hadn't known she carried had been lifted. Her fears had been challenged, her assumptions gently unraveled by a man who had shown her, in his own quiet way, that kindness could bridge even the deepest divides. And as she drove through the night, her heart still beating with the rhythm of their unexpected connection, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just lived through the beginning of a story that would stay with her forever. A bridge across differences. The quiet hum of the engine was Jasmine's only companion as she continued her drive home. Yet tonight, it felt as though she were bringing someone else's words with her, words that echoed softly, reminding her of a simple truth she had rarely allowed herself to embrace. Not every encounter was destined to be a confrontation. The officer's story of the veteran in the park had lingered in her mind, his admission of assumptions and the gentle way he had approached her making her reevaluate her own thoughts. It was a strange feeling, as if her mind was shifting, making space for a new understanding. Jasmine's thoughts returned to her work at the studio. She had always painted from a place of emotion, her brush capturing the layers of the human experience, the struggles, joys, and sorrows woven into every life. She had spent countless hours alone with her canvases, pouring her heart into each one, each stroke revealing a part of her she found hard to express with words. Her art had become her voice, a way to process the world around her and connect with those who resonated with her journey. But tonight, she realized that the world outside her studio held lessons and connections that no amount of paint could capture. She glanced at her rearview mirror, half expecting the officer's patrol car to still be behind her, even though she knew he had gone the other way. The way he had looked at her, with empathy rather than suspicion, stayed with her. The flicker of kindness in his eyes, the story he had shared, all felt like fragments of a memory she was meant to carry forward. In a moment of impulsivity, she reached for her phone and called her best friend, Kara. She needed someone to process this with, someone who might understand the strange mix of emotions swirling within her. The phone rang a few times before Kara's sleepy voice answered. "Hey, Jas. You okay?" Jasmine smiled, imagining Kara's groggy expression as she fought to stay awake. "Yeah, sorry to call so late," she replied softly. I needed to talk to someone." "Did something happen?" Kara's voice sharpened, the concern clear in her tone. "Sort of," Jasmine replied, unsure where to begin. She took a deep breath, then launched into the story, recounting the moment she'd seen the flashing lights, the fear that had gripped her, and the unexpected kindness the officer had shown her. Kara listened quietly, not interrupting, allowing Jasmine to pour out every detail and emotion. By the time she finished, Jasmine felt a strange sense of release, as if sharing the story had helped her make sense of it. "Wow," Kara said finally, her voice tinged with awe. "Jas, I don't know what to say. I mean, it sounds incredible. But also, I get why you were scared. I would have felt the same." "Yeah," Jasmine admitted, staring out at the empty road stretching before her. "I just couldn't believe it. I had so many assumptions, Kara. I felt like like I had already decided how it was going to go before it even started. But that's the thing, isn't it? Kara mused. We carry our own stories, our own fears. And I don't think that's wrong. But it sounds like he understood that, like he saw you, not just, another person pulled over. Jasmine nodded, even though she knew Kara couldn't see her. Exactly. He treated me like a person. And that's what I think struck me the most. He didn't dismiss my fear. He understood it. And he didn't have to help me with my tire, but he did. Maybe that's what's important, Jas, Kara said thoughtfully. That you two were both willing to look past the roles society gave you, to see each other as people. You said he talked about the veteran, right? Maybe he's been on his own journey too. Jasmine's heart softened as she thought back to that part of their conversation. Yeah, he has. And it made me think about how much we all carry around our own biases, our own fears. I don't know. It just made me realize that maybe I've been closing myself off from people, afraid of what they might think or assume. Kara's voice grew warmer, filled with understanding. Jas, that's human. We're all trying to protect ourselves. But it sounds like this experience opened a door for you. Maybe you'll paint about it. Jasmine's eyes widened at the thought, a rush of inspiration filling her chest. She hadn't considered that this encounter could influence her art, but as soon as Kara mentioned it, she felt a spark, a vision forming in her mind. You're right, Kara. I think I have to. The image that danced in her mind was one of connection, of two people from different worlds finding common ground. She pictured hands reaching toward each other, one painted in shades of midnight blue and the other in a warm, earthy tone, their fingers almost touching. It would be a portrait of understanding, of the humanity that existed beyond titles and uniforms. She could already see the brushstrokes, the textures that would convey vulnerability and strength, the layers that would capture the fears and hopes they both carried. Thank you, Kara, she said softly, a renewed sense of purpose in her voice. I needed this. I needed to share it with someone. That's what friends are for, Kara replied, her tone gentle and filled with love. You're brave, Jas, don't forget that. They said their goodnights, and Jasmine continued her journey, the road unfurling before her like a blank canvas, waiting for her to make her mark. Her thoughts drifted back to the officer, to the way he had spoken with her, his voice filled with the weight of his own struggles. She wondered what had led him to his understanding, what moments in his life had taught him to listen rather than judge, to reach out rather than retreat. The stars twinkled above her, silent witnesses to her journey, and she felt a sense of unity, a connection that spanned beyond words. She thought of her painting, of the hands that would reach toward each other, and she knew it would be more than just a piece for the gallery. It would be her own expression of this night, a night that had shown her that kindness could bridge divides, that understanding could heal wounds. As she neared her neighborhood, Jasmine felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had always believed that art could change lives, but tonight she realized that it was the simple, human moments like this, that truly transformed hearts. She had been given a gift, a glimpse into another person's life, a reminder that sometimes the bridges we fear are the very ones that connect us. When she finally pulled into her driveway, Jasmine turned off the engine and sat in the quiet stillness, her heart swelling with gratitude. She thought of the gallery show, of how her art would carry the message of this night, a message she now understood was her purpose. She closed her eyes, a soft smile touching her lips, and in that moment, she felt a sense of peace unlike any she had ever known. She had seen the face behind the badge, and he had seen the heart beyond her fear. And together, in a single, shared moment, they had created a bridge that would inspire her to share this story, not just with paint and canvas, but with every heartbeat. The canvas of connection. The following day, Jasmine awoke to the faint glow of morning light filtering through her window, a soft reminder of the peace she had found the night before. She lay still, her mind drifting back to the quiet road, the officer's warm voice, and the surprising humanity that had blossomed in their unexpected encounter. It was a memory that felt distant yet vivid, like a dream that had left a lasting imprint on her heart. She found herself smiling, an emotion hovering between gratitude and disbelief. By mid-morning, Jasmine was back at her studio, her fingers itching to paint. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of jazz music playing softly in the background, the melodies grounding her as she prepared her canvas. She laid out her paints carefully, each color selected with purpose, each brush a tool to capture the depth of what she had experienced. She could feel the echoes of the night, the lingering warmth of connection, as if the canvas itself were calling her to begin. She started with a deep shade of blue, mixing in touches of violet and black, letting the colors flow across the canvas like the darkness that had surrounded her on that deserted road. Her brush moved instinctively, guided by her memory of the night. She layered the blues and blacks, creating an expanse that was both haunting and beautiful, capturing the quiet solitude of a night lit only by the soft glow of headlights. In those strokes, she poured the fear she had felt, the isolation of being alone on a quiet road, each line and shadow capturing the unspoken tension that had gripped her. But as her brush moved, Jasmine found herself reaching for warmer colors, hints of orange, soft touches of yellow, even the faintest trace of pink. She began to blend these into the edges of the dark background, letting them bleed gently into the blues, a symbol of the unexpected kindness that had pierced through her fear. These colors, like rays of dawn breaking through the night, brought a softness to the canvas, a reminder that hope could emerge even in the darkest moments. She paused, stepping back to look at what she had created so far. The canvas felt alive, pulsing with the emotion she had carried from that night. She felt a surge of excitement, as if she were on the brink of something profound, something she couldn't quite articulate yet, but knew would reveal itself with each stroke. As she stood there, her mind wandered to the officer again, to the way he had looked at her with understanding, to the gentle way he had shared his story of the veteran in the park. She had been so guarded, her own biases blinding her to the humanity he was trying to extend. And yet, in his patience, he had offered her a bridge, a way to see beyond her fears. A sudden idea sparked within her, and she grabbed a smaller brush, dipping it into a mix of warm brown and rich mahogany. She began to paint a hand reaching forward. Emerging from the darkness, tentative yet steady, fingers outstretched as if reaching for something just beyond its grasp. This hand, she decided, would represent herself, the courage it took for her to step out of her fear and extend trust in a moment that had felt so vulnerable. Her hand, rooted in her own experiences, reaching toward an unknown, a world she had feared yet was learning to trust. She worked meticulously, each brushstroke deliberate, each line and curve infused with her emotions. She painted the hand in soft but resilient tones, capturing the mix of strength and fragility she had felt that night. The hand was layered, textured, a testament to the journey she had taken to get here, to a place where she could open herself to the kindness of others. But the canvas was far from complete. Jasmine knew that this was not just her story. It was a story of two people, two souls meeting in a moment of mutual understanding. She took up another brush, choosing a blend of light gray and deep chestnut, and began to paint a second hand, reaching toward the first, fingers extended in a gentle invitation. This hand was larger, its presence calm and grounded, yet vulnerable in its own way. It represented the officer, his quiet strength, the openness with which he had approached her, not as a figure of authority, but as a fellow human being. The two hands reached for each other across the canvas, their fingers nearly touching but separated by a thin sliver of space. Jasmine painted this gap with soft touches of light, using gentle strokes of yellow and gold to symbolize the connection that had formed between them, a connection built on empathy, respect, and the willingness to see beyond the surface. She marveled at how, with just a brush and paint, she could capture the feeling of that moment, the power of human connection. As she painted, memories of the conversation they'd shared replayed in her mind, each word and look taking on new layers of meaning. She remembered the way he had shared his own story, his quiet humility, and the compassion that had softened his gaze. She realized, in those moments, that his kindness had not only dispelled her fear, but had reminded her of the beauty of vulnerability, of the courage it took to let go of assumptions and allow oneself to truly see and be seen. The afternoon light filtered into the studio, casting a warm glow across the canvas. Jasmine continued to work, adding fine details to the hands, the gentle lines that told stories of experience and resilience, of journeys both unique and shared. She could feel her own heart in the strokes, a reflection of her hope that this painting would speak to others, that it would serve as a reminder that people could find connection in the most unexpected places. By the time she finished, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the room. Jasmine stepped back, her eyes scanning the canvas, her heart swelling with a sense of accomplishment. She had poured her soul into this piece, capturing the raw, transformative experience of that night. The two hands, suspended in a moment of reaching, seemed to vibrate with life, with the unspoken promise of understanding that lay between them. She titled the piece, "Reaching Beyond Fear." It felt fitting, a tribute to the journey she had taken, to the fear that had once held her back, and the courage it had taken to reach beyond it. The canvas was no longer just a reflection of a moment, but a message of hope, a reminder that trust could be built even in the quietest of exchanges, that understanding could emerge from the simplest acts of kindness. As she stood there, gazing at the finished piece, she felt a sense of peace she had never known. It was as if, in creating this work, she had come to terms with parts of herself she hadn't fully understood before. She had faced her own biases, her own fears, and had emerged on the other side, carrying a new perspective, a new sense of purpose. Jasmine knew that this painting would be the centerpiece of her gallery show, a story she was eager to share with others. She hoped that those who saw it would feel the connection she had felt, that they would recognize themselves in the hands reaching across the canvas, in the space between them that held the promise of understanding. With a deep breath, she turned off the studio lights, casting one last look at her work before heading home. The night had gifted her something precious, a new vision, a new purpose, and as she left the studio, she felt as though she were leaving a piece of herself behind, woven into the fabric of that canvas. It was a story she would carry with her always, a reminder of the power of kindness and the beauty of human connection, a story she was now ready to share with the world. A ripple of kindness. The days leading up to Jasmine's gallery opening were filled with a whirlwind of activity. Between finalizing her other pieces, coordinating with the gallery, and preparing for the big night, she barely had. As evening approached, the gallery began to fill with visitors, friends, fellow artists, and art enthusiasts drawn by word of mouth and the unique invitation Jasmine had sent out, hinting at a piece that spoke to the courage of connection. Each guest seemed to bring their own energy, their own stories, and Jasmine couldn't help but wonder how they would interpret her work, what meaning they would find within it. Kara arrived shortly after the gallery opened, giving Jasmine a tight hug and a grin that reflected her own excitement. "Jas, this is incredible," she said, her eyes bright with pride. "You've really outdone yourself. Reaching beyond fear. I don't even have words. It's breathtaking." Jasmine smiled, feeling a flush of warmth in her cheeks. "Thank you, Kara. I still can't believe how much that night changed me. I'm just grateful that I could capture it." Kara nodded, her gaze lingering on the painting. "You didn't just capture it, Jas. You transformed it into something universal. Anyone who sees this can feel that connection, that tension and hope. It's like the hands are alive." They stood in silence for a moment, both lost in the imagery. Jasmine felt a pang of emotion, realizing that she had indeed managed to convey the story in a way that transcended words. It was a silent language, one that could reach anyone willing to see, to listen. As the evening wore on, more guests gravitated toward Reaching Beyond Fear. Jasmine found herself engaged in conversations about the piece, listening as people shared their own interpretations, their personal connections to the imagery. Some saw it as a reflection of love, others as a symbol of reconciliation, and a few even shared stories of encounters that had reshaped their own perspectives. Each interpretation left Jasmine humbled, reminded that art was not just about what the artist intended, but about the meanings others brought to it. Then, a familiar voice cut through the gentle hum of conversation, a voice that sent a shiver of recognition down her spine. "Beautiful work, Ms. Davis." Jasmine turned, her heart skipping a beat as she recognized Officer Daniels standing a few feet away. He was out of uniform, dressed in a simple button-down shirt, looking at her with the same warmth she had felt that night on the road. Her surprise was evident, and for a moment she struggled to find her words. "Officer Daniels," she said, her voice soft but filled with genuine gratitude. I didn't expect to see you here." He offered a gentle smile, his gaze shifting to the painting. "You invited me, remember?" he replied, pulling out the gallery invitation she had given him as a thank you. "After our encounter, I kept thinking about what you said, how you expressed your fears and opened up. It stayed with me, so when you mentioned your art, I had to see it for myself." They both turned their attention to the painting, standing side by side, each lost in their own thoughts. Jasmine felt her pulse quicken as she watched him study the hands reaching across the canvas. For a long time, he was silent, his face reflecting a mix of awe and understanding, as though he too were reliving their shared moment. "Did you know," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "that night was one of those rare times when I felt like I was truly seen, not as an officer, but as a person. It reminded me why I chose this line of work in the first place." Jasmine swallowed, feeling her throat tighten with emotion. "And you reminded me that I could let go of my assumptions, that I could find trust in places I'd been afraid to look." She hesitated, then added, "This painting, reaching beyond fear, it's not just about that night. It's about the hope that maybe more of us could see each other like we did." He nodded, his gaze still fixed on the hands. "You know, we live in a world that often tells us to keep our guards up, to assume the worst in others. But moments like ours, they remind me that we can choose kindness, that we can choose to reach across the divide. Your art, it's a bridge, Jasmine. It's a way for people to see beyond what separates us." As they stood there, others began to gather around, sensing the depth of their connection. People listened, overhearing fragments of their conversation, drawn to the story that lay behind the painting. Jasmine noticed the curiosity in their eyes, the wonder and compassion, as if they were seeing the real-life echo of the canvas come alive before them. Jasmine felt a surge of gratitude, her heart swelling with a sense of purpose. Reaching beyond fear wasn't just her story. It was a story that resonated with everyone who had ever dared to open themselves to the unknown, to trust where they might have felt fear. It was a story that reminded her of the power of empathy, of the strength in reaching out even when it felt vulnerable. At the end of the night, as the gallery began to empty, Jasmine and Officer Daniels lingered by the painting, both feeling the weight of their encounter and the journey it had inspired. Jasmine felt a deep sense of peace, a contentment that went beyond her artistic success. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "Thank you for showing me that fear doesn't have to be the final word, that there's a world beyond it." Officer Daniels met her gaze, his expression thoughtful. "And thank you, Jasmine, for sharing this moment with the world. I believe it will make a difference." As he turned to leave, Jasmine knew their paths might never cross again, but she also knew that they were forever connected, bound by a moment of kindness that had changed them both. She felt stronger, more certain of her path, knowing that she had not only created a painting but a ripple of compassion, a message that would live on long after the gallery lights had dimmed. When the last guest had gone, Jasmine took one final look at Reaching Beyond Fear. She knew it would continue to speak, to touch lives, and perhaps, even in its silence, inspire others to reach beyond their own fears. And as she left the gallery, she carried the warmth of that night with her, a quiet reminder that humanity's greatest gift was the courage to connect, to reach out, and to find hope even in the spaces that once felt too far to cross. The journey beyond the canvas. A week after the gallery opening, Jasmine found herself in a cafe near her studio, sipping a steaming cup of coffee as she reread messages from friends, family, and strangers who had attended the exhibit. Reaching Beyond Fear had sparked a profound response, drawing people from all walks of life who found themselves moved by the story behind the hands reaching across the canvas. Jasmine read messages that spoke of healing, hope, and connection. Some even recounted their own experiences of kindness and unexpected understanding. The painting had become a conversation, a bridge that connected people in ways Jasmine hadn't anticipated. One message, in particular, lingered in her mind. It was from a young woman named Sophia, who had written, "Your painting reminded me of my brother, who I lost last year. He was a police officer. I'd had so many complicated feelings about him, about the job he did, about how others saw him and how he saw the world. But when I saw Reaching Beyond Fear, it felt like you had painted a part of his soul. Thank you for that." Jasmine's heart ached as she reread Sophia's words. She understood the weight of that pain, the complexity of holding on to love and loss, the duality of feeling hurt by the world yet still connected to it. She replied to Sophia, thanking her for sharing her story, and found herself penning a few words of her own. It's these connections that keep us moving forward. It's a reminder that we all carry our stories with us, and sometimes, through moments of understanding, we find pieces of ourselves in each other. As she sent the message, Jasmine realized how much the experience had changed her. She no longer saw her art as a solitary expression. It was now a part of a larger conversation, a way to invite others to reflect and find themselves within the layers of paint and color. That night with Officer Daniels had unlocked something within her, a new sense of purpose that extended beyond her studio, her canvas, and even her own story. It was about connection, about creating moments where people could see themselves in each other's lives, if only for a moment. A few days later, Jasmine received an unexpected call from the gallery director. "Jasmine, you won't believe this," the director said, her voice vibrating with excitement. "A community center in the city reached out to us. They've been hosting workshops and discussions on empathy and social unity, and they're interested in featuring Reaching Beyond Fear. They think your work could inspire meaningful conversations among their participants." Jasmine felt a surge of emotion, her heart swelling at the thought of her painting continuing to bridge divides and spark dialogue. "That sounds amazing," she replied, already feeling a deep connection to this new purpose. "I'd love for it to be a part of their space." The details were quickly arranged, and within a week, Reaching Beyond Fear was on display in the community center, surrounded by a circle of chairs where visitors could sit, reflect, and share their thoughts. Jasmine was invited to speak at the center on the first day of the exhibit, and she spent hours preparing what she wanted to say. She wanted to convey the journey of that night, the transformation that had unfolded within her, and the power of kindness to create ripples of understanding. She knew it would be an emotional experience, but she felt ready, driven by a desire to share her story openly and honestly. When the day arrived, Jasmine walked into the community center with a mixture of anticipation and gratitude. People had already gathered around the painting, their quiet murmurs filling the room as they studied the hands reaching across the canvas. The warm light cast a soft glow over the painting, illuminating the details of the two hands. Her own hand, reaching forward in vulnerability, and the officer's, extending in compassion and strength. It was a scene that seemed to invite viewers to enter into the story, to imagine the world that existed in the space between those hands. As Jasmine stepped forward to address the group, she felt a wave of calm wash over her. She introduced herself, then shared the story of that night on the quiet road, how her fear had melted into trust, and how that single moment had opened her heart to the possibilities of understanding. She could see the faces of her audience soften as they listened, their eyes reflecting empathy, curiosity, and connection. "Art is more than a painting on a wall," she said, her voice steady yet gentle. "It's a reminder that we are all a part of each other's stories. When we look beyond our fears, beyond our judgments, we create spaces where compassion can grow. Reaching beyond fear isn't just my story. It's a story that belongs to everyone who has ever found courage in vulnerability, who has ever trusted in kindness." As she spoke, she noticed Sophia, the young woman who had messaged her, standing in the back of the room, her eyes filled with tears and gratitude. Jasmine's heart swelled, and she continued, drawing strength from Sophia's presence and the shared connection that spanned beyond words. When her speech ended, there was a moment of silence, a shared breath that seemed to bind everyone in the room. Then, slowly, the applause began, soft and steady, a gesture of collective appreciation, of understanding. Jasmine felt herself embraced by the warmth of the room, the unity of people who had come together, not because they shared the same stories, but because they understood the emotions beneath them. Afterward, people came up to her, each sharing pieces of their lives. Some told of moments when they, too, had bridged divides, while others spoke of fears they were working to overcome. Sophia approached her, and they shared a quiet moment. No words needed as they held hands and shared the weight of their stories. As the crowd began to disperse, the director of the community center approached Jasmine with a smile. "Jasmine, we've had people asking if they could leave notes, reflections inspired by your painting. We thought maybe we could create a sort of journal where people could write their thoughts." Jasmine's heart leaped at the idea. "I'd love that. It's like the painting is becoming a living conversation, something that keeps growing as people add their stories." The journal was placed on a small stand next to the painting, and over the next few weeks, it filled with notes, letters, and reflections. Each entry was a testament to the power of the painting, of the story it told. Some visitors wrote about the hands reaching across the divide, finding parallels in their own lives. Others shared stories of forgiveness, of family, of reaching out to those they had once feared or misunderstood. The journal became an extension of reaching beyond fear, a living testament to the courage it took to trust in humanity. Jasmine visited the community center often, reading through the entries, her heart swelling with every story shared. She realized that her painting had become more than a single moment captured on canvas. It was now a part of a larger movement, a ripple of kindness that continued to spread. One evening, as she sat alone in front of the painting, flipping through the journal, she found a note from Officer Daniels. She hadn't seen him since the gallery opening, but his words felt like a continuation of their silent understanding. "Jasmine," the note read, "I can't tell you how much this painting means to me. You've shown me that kindness isn't just an action. It's a legacy, something we can pass on, like a spark. Thank you for sharing this moment with the world. It's reminded me of why I do what I do, and how we all have the power to reach beyond fear." Jasmine felt tears fill her eyes, her heart swelling with gratitude and peace. She closed the journal, her mind filled with a quiet, profound understanding. The journey that had started with a single night on a quiet road had unfolded into something she could never have imagined. She had created art that spoke to the human soul, that invited others to see each other, not through fear, but through compassion. As she stood up to leave, Jasmine took one last look at reaching beyond fear, her heart full. She knew that the story would continue, that each person who saw the painting, who left a note in the journal, was part of a legacy of kindness, a legacy built one small, courageous moment at a time. And with that, Jasmine walked away, leaving behind a piece of herself, a gift that would continue to touch lives, a bridge across differences, a journey beyond the canvas.